Chapter 1. The truck driver killed the engine and let the vehicle coast to the side of the desolate road. In the rearview mirror, he saw no signs of the white-eyed belated theatergoer from miles back. There was no police car on their tail. The cloudy sky behind them glowed with the amber lights of Manhasset and Port Washington. Ahead, a solitary red light flickered weakly on a gas station sign, a silent sentinel in the dark night. To the right of the road, somber shadows cast by pine and spruce trees stood in close formation. Across the winding road, a pale sandbank loomed in the gloom, its wind-sculpted hollows dropping a dozen feet from the highway to the still water below. The driver nodded with satisfaction, knowing a truck driver at high speed could easily miss a curve like this. He turned off the headlights, allowing the darkness to creep closer, engulfing the truck. The driver stepped out and walked to the rear of the truck, unlocking the swinging doors. He used a pencil flashlight to illuminate the inside. The delivery truck was empty, save for some discarded wrapping paper, cardboard cartons, and a man lying on the floor, his legs bound in such a way that he couldn't straighten them. "I've been thinking," the man said, his voice high-pitched with fear. "Maybe you're right. I should just forget about the whole thing. Go away somewhere and..." "You're going away, all right," the driver said, devoid of mockery or humor. "So you can forget it, like you said." The man struggled to sit up. "What are you taking out of my pocket?" The driver held up a thin roll of bills, the green of the money visible in the weak light. "I'm not taking anything out. I'm putting this in. So you'll have something for that little trip, see?" Panic filled the man's face as the driver hauled him out of the truck, revealing the desolate road, the looming woods, and the beach. He glanced toward the beach, terrified. "What are you going to do with me?" "Give you a bath," the driver said, carrying the man across the highway to the edge of the sandbank. "You stink. Anyone who'd do what you did stinks. So you need a bath." "You're going to kill me," the man cried. Nah. Never killed anyone yet. Not starting with you. Homicide, that's trouble. I've had enough of that. Don't want any with the law. Nah." The man moaned in terror, cut short as he was dropped onto the soft bank. He rolled down the slope, splashing into the shallow water where the tide lapped against the wet sand. "Go ahead. Holler if you want to," the driver said, standing over him. "Maybe there's a couple hidden in the woods somewhere. Maybe they'll hear you." The man lay on his side, his mouth wide open, his lips stretched tight against his teeth, and his forehead wrinkled with fear. He squinted as if to shut out the sight above him. "You're going to drown me," he whispered. "Not me. The water might, though, if you can't keep your head above." The driver grabbed the man's bound wrists and dragged him deeper into the water, the waves gradually rising higher around them. The man's terror escalated with each inch of water that enveloped him. "You're making a mistake," the man pleaded, his voice cracking. "I swear, I won't tell anyone. Just let me go, please." The driver's eyes remained cold and unyielding, betraying no sympathy or remorse. "You had your chance, but you blew it. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to double-cross us." As they reached waist-deep water, the man's fear gave way to desperation. He tried to keep his head above water, but his bound legs and the driver's relentless grip made it nearly impossible. The icy water stung his face, and he struggled for breath between the waves that crashed over him. "Please," the man gasped, choking on seawater. "I'll do anything, just don't kill me." The driver paused, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "All right, I've got a deal for you. If you make it back to the shore, you live. But if you don't..." He let the threat hang in the air, a cruel game of chance. The man's eyes widened as the driver released his grip, leaving him to fend for himself in the unforgiving sea. Panic set in as the man fought against the tide, desperately trying to keep his head above water while his bound limbs threatened to drag him under. From the shore, the driver watched dispassionately, knowing full well the odds were against the man. In the dim light, he could see the man's splashing grow weaker and weaker, his cries for help swallowed by the roar of the waves. Then, just as the driver was about to turn away, a figure emerged from the tree line. Tall and slender, the stranger approached the water's edge, their eyes locked on the man's frantic struggle. Without hesitation, the stranger dove into the water, their powerful strokes cutting through the waves as they closed in on the drowning man. The driver's heart raced as he realized his plan had gone awry. But who was this mysterious savior? And what did their arrival mean for him? As the stranger reached the man and began pulling him toward the shore, the driver knew he had no choice but to disappear into the shadows, his thirst for vengeance unquenched, for now. Unbeknownst to him, the stranger's appearance marked the beginning of an intricate web of lies, betrayal, and murder, a dark and twisting tale that would keep the inhabitants of this sleepy coastal town on the edge of their seats. Chapter 2. Nimbleit's stone facade towered like an imposing monument amidst the chaos of Fifth Avenue's Saturday afternoon traffic. 10 grand stories above honking taxis and impatient crowds waiting for the green light, the store stretched a full block, its glittering window displays drawing the attention of passers-by. The name Nimbleit's evoked an air of dignified prestige and exclusive extravagance. Even the sales clerks carried themselves with an aura of deliberate hauteur. Behind frosted glass, labeled Chief, Store Protection, Danny Gumbo, a slim man with prematurely gray hair, sat at his desk. His ordinarily pleasant features were marred by worry, and his normally restless gray eyes appeared harried. Don felt beaten down, utterly exhausted from hiding the fact that he was at his wits' end regarding the disappearance of a delivery truck and its driver. The known facts were simple. Yesterday afternoon, March 24, at 1:17 p.m., delivery unit number 8, driven by Lyle J. Berger, employee badge 2049, had checked out of Nimbleit's shipping bay with a full load of packages. Since then, no customers had seen him, nor had Berger's wife, friends, or acquaintances. The value of the packages in unit number 8 was close to $75,000, largely due to the inclusion of 14 genuine Russian blue sable stoles, retailing at $3,750 each. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Gumbo picked it up, bracing himself for more inquiries about the missing truck, driver, or merchandise. "Protection," he said, trying to sound confident. "Don, it's Alice. I've got an AF in costume jewelry." "All right," he replied, not wanting to be short with Alice Stein, his best operative on the first floor. "You handle it. I'm swamped. Get the stuff back, give her a warning." "But, Don, listen." Alice sounded excited. "This girl knows I'm watching her. She's still snatching stuff." Gumbo sighed, knowing that while he stewed over the missing $75,000 worth of merchandise, Alice was dealing with a small-time shoplifter. "Well, bring her up." "Right away." Alice hung up. Gumbo tried to put the matter out of his mind for the moment. His staff dealt with a dozen or so shoplifters every day, but right now, the missing truck and driver were his top priority. When Alice brought the girl into his office, Gumbo questioned her, trying to get her to open up. She wore a silver fox neckpiece that caught his attention, and he soon realized it was one of the stolen furs from their shipping deck. The girl, who called herself Betty Wheeler, claimed she'd received it as a gift from a mysterious man named Freddie. Gumbo pressed her for more information, hoping she might help him solve the case of the stolen fur. Instead, she begged him to send her to prison, claiming she was a thief who deserved punishment. Confused, Gumbo asked Alice to leave them alone, hoping to uncover the truth behind the girl's erratic behavior and her connection to the stolen fur. Chapter. Gumbo reached for the young woman's handbag in her lap, and she made no move to stop him or lift her head. He opened it and emptied the contents onto his desk. The items were sparse: an inexpensive lipstick and compact, a matchbook from the Chick Inn on Jamaica Boulevard, another matchbook advertising aspirin, a small check stub with the word Cuban written on it, a green suede purse containing $1.41 in coins, 2 Yale keys, bobby pins, a handkerchief with the initial G embroidered in the corner, a leadless metal pencil, and nothing else. No letters, bills, or envelopes, no address, book or phone numbers. However, hidden in the zipper compartment of the bag was a single folded blank check from the Citizens Commercial Trust, Jamaica branch. "You went to great lengths to hide your identity, didn't you?" Gumbo put everything back into the bag except for the check stub, which he casually flicked under a stack of reports. He suspected she was watching him from the corner of her eye but didn't think she would notice the subtle movement of his thumb. She finally lifted her head, her eyes swimming with tears. "I don't want to talk about it. You caught me, arrested me, and what more is there to say?" "Plenty," he replied, studying her uneasily. He reminded himself not to be swayed by his sympathies. That was always his greatest danger, letting his feelings for people like her influence his judgment. It wouldn't be hard to have feelings for this attractive young woman. She was nothing like the hardened criminals who usually found their way to his office. "You might tell me why you're putting on an act," he said. "You're not a professional, or you'd know that whatever you snatched from the costume jewelry counter wouldn't be worth the risk. You couldn't pawn it for the price of a decent meal. You aren't wearing any jewelry, not even a wristwatch. Yet you stuff a bunch of trinkets inside your bra. You give me a fake address, probably a fake name, too. You look like you could use a few bucks for new clothes, but you're wearing a neck piece worth $75 or $100. We know what it's worth because it was one of 3 stolen from our delivery platform recently." The girl pulled a second handkerchief from her jacket pocket, wiping her eyes. Why don't you just arrest me and let it go at that? Are you eager to be locked up? How would you feel if we sent you to the city hospital instead for a psychiatric examination? No. She shot up from the chair, standing rigidly, fists clenched at her sides. You wouldn't do that. There's nothing wrong with me mentally. I'm perfectly fine. Just then, the phone rang. Protection. I'm calling on behalf of a young woman who, I believe, has been detained in your store for, shoplifting. The man on the other end of the line sounded serious, yet uncomfortable. I'm authorized to inform you that the full sum covering any items she may have, stolen will be delivered to your office promptly in cash if you release her without any accompanying publicity. Gumbo responded with a noncommittal grunt. We've detained several young women today. Which one are you referring to? A very young one. She's 21. Quite attractive. What's her name? Gumbo had held this type of conversation before, but it was odd that someone had learned of the girl's arrest so quickly. Her first name, the man grew cautious, is Georgia. I'd rather not mention any other name over the phone, if you understand. No, I don't. Are you a relative? I'm representing a relative, sir. If you could state the amount? Listen. Gumbo pulled the receiver away from his ear so the girl could hear the voice. We can't make deals blindly. If you'll have one of George's family members, someone who can vouch for her, come to my office, we might be able to work something out. Oh. The girl covered her mouth with her clenched fists. Her family, the man replied smoothly, doesn't wish to be involved in this matter at all. I'm sure you can understand their reasons. Gumbo saw the girl brace herself against the desk, certain she recognized the voice on the phone. Assuming we do release her, what guarantee do we have that she won't commit the same crime again? She collapsed against the desk, fell to her knees, and slumped to the floor. The voice asked, What did you say? Gumbo stood up. You come around, perhaps we can work this out. The man on the other end hesitated. I'd be happy to send someone with the money. Just tell me the amount. If you're not certain, make a generous estimate. You'll have it within 20 minutes. That sounds suspiciously like a bribe, sir. Gumbo placed the phone on the desk where he could hear and speak into it. He lifted the girl and seated her back in the chair. But I'm always open to conversation. What was your name again? I regret that you're unwilling to release her. The question was skillfully dodged. Well, we might still consider it. Gumbo made it sound casual. We recovered all the stolen merchandise. If she provides a proper statement, she could be home tonight. It would be much simpler if you'd just stop by. I'll try my best, I truly will. I need to discuss it with her family. But thank you very much for your open-mindedness, sir. The call ended. Gumbo mused aloud while dialing, now there's a very disappointed gentleman. I wonder why he's so eager to free her when she's so determined to stay detained? When his call connected, he asked for Lieutenant McCrollins. Mac? Don. I've got a situation here, a woman. No, not personal. I'd like her held on a brief affidavit without appearing before the judge until Monday morning. Think you can manage that? Open and shut, petty larceny. Witnesses? Detective Gumbo rubbed his chin thoughtfully. We've got witnesses and an admission of guilt. But there are still a few loose ends to tie up before we can close the case. Thanks, Mac. I'll make sure she's brought in for questioning immediately. Alice hesitated for a moment, then knocked on the door. As it creaked open, she caught sight of the young woman inside and couldn't help but gape. Good heavens, what happened to her? Is she malnourished, or did something frighten her into a state of shock? She asked, concern etched on her face. Someone certainly rattled her cage, Gumbo replied, filling her in on the mysterious phone call. She's petrified that we'll release her and the man on the other end will get to her. We can prevent that, of course, but it doesn't get us any closer to solving this puzzle. Alice nodded as Gumbo continued, Mr. Zilberkey has agreed to testify that this stolen fox fur originated from his stock. He can't confirm it was among the ones reported missing, but it's a start. Gumbo glanced at an address on the personnel record card, his eyebrows furrowing. Do you know where Lyle Berger lives? Somewhere in Brooklyn, I believe, Alice replied, gently massaging the girl's wrists to restore circulation. Jamaica, to be precise. Just a few blocks from the bank where this young woman, or someone she knows, has a checking account. Gumbo reached for his topcoat. After I drop her off at the precinct, I might take a quick detour to check out the area. The small room was dimly lit, casting eerie shadows that seemed to accentuate the young woman's gaunt features. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted around nervously as she sat on the edge of the worn sofa. Despite her apparent terror, There was a defiant glint in her gaze that piqued Gumbo's interest. He had a hunch that there was more to this case than met the eye, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. Chapter. The shoe repairman squinted at the check stub Gumbo held out to him. "That's not from our shop, sir." "I wasn't sure," Gumbo admitted, which shop my wife had in mind. "It looks like one from Amadeo's. You could try there." "Where's that?" 3 blocks from here." The cobbler pointed. "On the corner of Greenlace." Gumbo navigated his car through the congested Jamaica Boulevard traffic. If the check he'd taken from the girl's bag was indeed from Amadeo's, it would be quite a coincidence. There were likely thousands of shoe repair shops in the metropolitan area. He might not have pursued this lead if it hadn't been for the torn piece of green pulp paper he'd found, the kind used for transfers on Jamaica-bound bus lines. Amadeo, a cheerful Italian man wearing an apron and holding a hammer, accepted the check and read the writing on the back. "Ah, yes. I put on Cuban heels for her. But they won't be ready until Monday night. I told Miss Carr I'm swamped with work. She said there was no rush." "My mistake," Gumbo smiled. "Monday it is." There was definitely a mistake somewhere. The name Carr triggered a memory. Nimbleit's head checker in the shipping room was Sam Carr. Gumbo decided he had enough to go on and wanted a closer look at the Carr residence. Using the phone book, he found Sam Carr's address on Greenlace Lane, part of a new cottage development. Rows of tidy white 6-room houses with patches of lawn and shrubbery in the front stood in uniform alignment, some with 1-car garages in the back and white picket fences. Carr's house, number 81, was at the end of a muddy lane that disappeared into a marshy bog. Gumbo parked his car, its tires sinking into the mud, and carefully made his way to the porch. No one answered the doorbell, and the front door was locked. He circled to the back of the house, noticing tire marks in the driveway, too wide for an ordinary car and too deep for anything other than a loaded truck. Nimbleit's fleet had that distinct interlocking diamond tread as well. The garage was open and empty. The tire marks didn't lead to the garage but veered off into what would one day be a flower bed, stopping just a foot from a high-railed stoop. Gumbo climbed the cement steps, tried the locked door, and peered through a kitchen window. The floor, table, and stove were all strewn with torn cartons, crumpled wrapping paper, and wads of Excelsior. It looked like the aftermath of a chaotic Christmas morning. Gumbo felt a strange sensation at the back of his neck. He put his hand on the sill to get a better look and felt something jab him. Splinters. Someone had forced the window open with a knife or a jimmy. The catch was turned, the window was unlocked. Gumbo considered reporting his suspicions to the nearest police station, but if there was anyone in the house, they would already be alerted. And if the house was empty, he could say if there was an intruder in the house, they would have already been alerted by Gumbo's actions, and would make their escape. On the other hand, if there was no one inside, Gumbo would save time by entering and using Carr's phone. He pushed up the window, paused to listen for a moment, and heard nothing. He then climbed over the windowsill and into the kitchen. Gumbo found himself knee-deep in a sea of crinkling paper, thick brown wrapping and lighter sheets of French gray adorned with cerise pencil stripes, which were as much a part of Nimbleit's trademark as the store's name itself. Yet, there was no trace of the missing merchandise. Sam Carr, Gumbo could hardly believe it. Carr was a mild-mannered, sad-eyed man with droopy mustache and thick-lensed spectacles. He was the type of fussy, precise clerk who still wore those old-fashioned straw cuff protectors over his coat sleeves, regardless of the season. Carr had worked as a shipping clerk and then an assistant checker for years before being promoted to head checker just a few months ago, coinciding with the recent surge of losses from package thieves that plagued Nimbleit's protection staff. Gumbo moved toward the front of the house, where the phone was likely located in the living room. The situation seemed like a carefully orchestrated scheme. A checker, like Sam Carr, working with a driver, could easily tip off the driver when valuable parcels were on board. Berger's truck had apparently been driven out here and around to the back door. The packages had been unwrapped, and the loot taken away. But why the forced window entry? Why had the merchandise been unwrapped here at Sam Carr's? And why had Georgia Carr, if that was her real name, been so desperate to be thrown into a jail cell? The front of the house was shrouded in darkness, with all shades drawn as dusk approached. Gumbo groped around the corner of the hall for the living room light switch, found it, and flicked it on. It was as if he'd triggered a bomb. The lights flared on, and at the same instant, a crippling blow to the head sent him stumbling forward onto his knees. Instinctively, he rolled onto his left side, raising his right hand to fend off another strike. His left hand dropped to the carpet for support. The weapon struck him across the right ear, making it feel like his head had exploded with a shattering concussion. Despite the pain, he didn't lose consciousness. He managed to catch a brief glimpse of a face in the round, ornamental mirror on the opposite wall, a face twisted with fear to the point that none of the man's features were identifiable. All Gumbo saw were white teeth and the whites of eyes beneath a visored cap. A third numbing impact knocked Gumbo against a coffee table, toppling it over. A glass cigarette box slid off, striking the table leg and shattering into fragments. Gumbo wondered vaguely why the crash made no sound, and why he didn't hear the click of the light switch when the room plunged into darkness once more. Chapter. Gumbo had always appreciated that as a department store detective, he didn't have to carry a gun or resort to violence like other detectives. He wasn't suited for a job where he had to rough up suspects in a back room to get a confession. Gumbo often felt sorry for the unfortunate souls he had to arrest, giving them a break when he could. But now, as the ringing in his ears subsided and the floor stopped lurching like a ship in a storm, he felt an intense thirst for vengeance. His professional concerns were momentarily overshadowed by a primitive urge to exact revenge on the person who had beaten him so badly that his right ear, neck, and coat collar were drenched in blood, and his head throbbed with agony. This visceral anger reminded him of an experience during the war at Bastogne. Before that fateful day, when a German grenade landed in his foxhole, he had fought without harboring any deep-seated hatred for the enemy. But the near loss of his arm ignited a cold, implacable fury that earned him a medal for his fearlessness in battle. As he staggered to his feet, Gumbo felt that same rage coursing through him, overwhelming any instinct to call for help. Once he was steady on his feet, Gumbo searched for a weapon. A menacing black glass leopard caught his eye on the mantel. He snatched it up and quickly examined the dining room, kitchen, bathroom, and ground floor bedroom, but found no sign of his attacker. He dialed Nimblets and asked Pat Relit, the head of shipping, if Carr was within earshot. "For God's sake, no," replied the gruff Irishman, who had been berated numerous times recently over the mysterious package thefts. "He's not even here." "Why not?" Gumbo inquired. "He clocked out around 2 o'clock. He's been having dizzy spells lately, and I told him to go home before he messed up our check sheets again." "What's wrong?" "What isn't?" Gumbo gingerly dabbed at his ear with a handkerchief. "Put me through to Miss Stein, will you?" So Carr had conveniently fallen ill around the time Georgia had been kidnapped. Could the mild-mannered man have disguised his voice during their strange phone conversation? Could that timid face have been the frightened one Gumbo saw in the mirror? Alice Stein picked up the line. "Mr. Zilberkey has been pestering me about the possibility of recovering those sable stoles, Mr. Gumbo." "Tell him there's a chance, Alice. But I need a favor. Ask Zilberkey to meet me in my office and wait for me there." "What time will you be back?" "Pretty quick. But in the meantime, go to Herb's office and give it a thorough search while he's out." She sounded surprised. "What am I looking for?" "I'm not sure, Alice. Anything unusual. Names or phone numbers of furriers or wholesalers. Bank deposit book. Just don't get caught snooping." "Will do. Are you all right?" "Yeah, sure. If my voice sounds odd, it must be the connection." He hung up, went to the bathroom, and did his best to clean up his battered face and swollen ear. Gumbo then went out the back way to search for a specific label among the hundreds of package wrappers. After a minute, he found it, the long gray and cerise box with the elegant gold and gray panel reading, His Highness the Gaikwar of Bagoda, Suite Park Plaza Towers, 5th Avenue, New York. The window clicked shut as he exited through the unlocked back door. He stashed the fur box in the trunk of his car before driving to Lyle Berger's residence on Mepham Place, just half a mile away. The row of narrow, brick townhouses looked virtually identical, distinguished only by their varying window dressings. Berger's windows glowed invitingly, shades drawn up, revealing a cozy living room. However, no one was in sight. Gumbo rang the doorbell, and the rapid clatter of high heels approached. A plump, sulky-eyed brunette with pouty lips opened the door. Her thick braid fell over the nape of her neck, framing her double chin. "What do you want?" she snapped. "Mrs. Berger?" Gumbo's bloody collar caught her attention. "I'm from Nimblets." "Ah, come in." She stepped aside. "If you're asking if I've heard from Lyle, I haven't. I don't expect to until the police catch him. Sit down and make yourself at home." Gumbo sank into a plush armchair, but the chill in the house made true comfort elusive. Everything appeared neat and tidy, save for the pile of men's socks spilling from a sewing basket on a side table. "Do you think Lyle just ran off, Mrs. Berger?" "What else am I supposed to think?" She brushed a stray hair from her forehead, irritated. "He didn't call last night to say he wasn't coming home, and he's been silent all day. I've fielded countless calls asking about him from the police, the surety company, and you. I haven't dared leave the house, fearing I'd miss news of his capture. Has your husband ever stayed away from home overnight before? Indeed, he has. About once a month, he'd call to say he needed to make a special trip to Montauk or somewhere in Connecticut and couldn't return that night. Once he claimed car trouble. I always suspected something was off. He never left a phone number, saying he might sleep in the truck. I only half believed him, even before I learned of the sneaky little minx he's been seeing. Another woman? That wretched Georgie Carr. Mrs. Berger's pudgy chin jutted forward, her eyes ablaze. I think they met at the bowling alley. She probably went with her brother. Sam Carr was on the shipping department team with Lyle. Soon, friends spotted them dancing at the Chick Inn. Then someone mentioned he'd taken her to the movies at Music Hall. He thought he was being discreet, but I knew he was cheating on me. How long has this been going on? A couple of months or so. Meanwhile, he's been wining and dining her at fancy restaurants, attending shows, and lavishing her with gifts, all while becoming increasingly stingy with household expenses. There's barely enough coal in the cellar to keep the furnace running. But that doesn't bother him while he's gallivanting with a floozy, stealing sables from his workplace. Gumbo couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the unattractive woman. But if the police catch him, they'll make it hot enough for him. May I see his room and clothes? He didn't take any suits, shirts, or ties, if that's what you mean. She sounded resentful. But if you want to look around. She led him up the narrow stairs to a bedroom. The spacious double bed commanded attention in the center of the room, dressed in luxurious linens. To the side, a vanity displayed an array of perfume bottles, cosmetics, and elegant silver-backed toiletries. A man's dresser sat nearby, adorned with military brushes, a handkerchief box, and a pack of cigarettes. A photograph of Lyle Berger, dressed in his military uniform, gazed out from a gleaming silver frame on the vanity. Meanwhile, the dresser showcased a portrait of Mrs. Berger, resplendent in her wedding gown. She strode purposefully towards the closet door and flung it open. As you can see, he never skimped on his wardrobe. The closet revealed 4 impeccably tailored suits from Nimblett's men's shop, a high-quality cashmere overcoat, 3 pairs of polished shoes, and a collection of vibrant ties displayed on a rack. Gumbo, however, focused on a delicate strand of brown, languidly draped across the closet's threshold. He inquired, "May I take a look at his suitcase?" As she bent down to retrieve the luggage from under the bed, Gumbo stealthily plucked the damp, supple strand and slipped it into his pocket. Chapter. The man inside the phone booth positioned himself to face the glass panels of the folding door, ensuring a clear view of anyone approaching. Simultaneously, his own reflection stared back at him through the fingerprint-smudged surface. As he listened intently, a single bead of sweat raced down to the tip of his nose, quivering there like a droplet of glass. "I understand," he murmured into the mouthpiece. "I'm well aware of the urgency. But turning those items into cash isn't a swift process. In fact, given the situation, it would be unwise to even attempt selling them for a while. Yes, I'll do my best. Maybe I can secure an advance of some sort. I promise to do everything I can and update you." He paused to listen, and then said, No. You can't call me back. I'm not in my office. I'm using a payphone, you see. I'll contact you as soon as, oh, no. I wouldn't even consider doing something like that. You should know me better than that. Yes. Goodbye. He replaced the receiver with deliberate slowness, as though his movements were mechanically controlled. He continued to gaze at his reflection in the grimy glass, alarmed to see the furrowed brow and trembling lips belong to him. He carefully wiped his face, took a moment to light a cigarette, and composed his features before stepping out of the booth. Chapter. The shipping room was cloaked in shadows, illuminated only by the focused light from the gooseneck lamp on Pat Rent's tall bookkeeping desk. Gumbo leaned casually against the desk. "I was at Carr's when I called you," he recounted. "I had a confrontation with a man who wasn't too fond of me snooping around. I didn't get a good look at him, but he took a decent swing at me. If it was Carr, he didn't stick around afterwards. The No. 8 truck had been there, emptied there, with all the items removed from the parcels. Mrs. Berger says her husband's been cozy with Sam Carr's sister. That's all I know. What have you got?" Rent's neck reddened as it swelled, resembling an irate turkey. "Sam's been acting off lately. I thought it was just nerves about the package thefts, like the rest of us. But it's strange that he had one of his episodes the same afternoon you were snooping around his place. However, if there's one crooked bone in Sam Carr's body, I'd forfeit my pension chances. He's not the most energetic guy, but he's never crossed the line in all the years I've known him." Gumbo amiably jabbed Rent's ribs. "Well, He's got a good boss anyway. You should call it a week, Pat. It's 6:30. The store will still be here Monday morning. Rent, still concerned, shook his head. We might hear about that truck. I'm getting sandwiches just in case. Don't hold your breath, Gumbo replied, taking the freight elevator to the 3rd floor. The area was deserted, save for the cleaning crew. Alice Stein sat at the receptionist's desk in front of the personnel office, fussing with her sleek coppery hair. Hey! Mr. Zilberkiet is about to lose it, she said. He had a dinner engagement at 6 and he's pretty upset about not making it. Sorry about that. Did you find anything? I don't know. I had personnel call his secretary away on the pretext of checking her social security card or something. It took me half an hour to go through his desk. There wasn't anything unusual, except he keeps a bottle of bourbon in his lower right-hand drawer to fend off germs. Against the rules, but understandable. Definitely. It's bonded. I had a taste. Anyway, while I was in there, someone called him. I answered. It was Felix Rachno of Rachno Brothers. You know, the big. Yes, Gumbo interrupted, aware that Rachno was a significant figure in the fur business. And? When I told him Mr. Zilberkiet was unavailable but that I could take a message, he became evasive. Mr. Zilberkiet wanted me to find a certain party for him. So if you just mention the Vanity Fur Fair to him, they might be the kind of people he had in mind. What is it, an auction house? Just a retail store on Fordham Road, in the Bronx. I looked them up. Their credit rating isn't great, C3. But I didn't want to ask around too much and arouse suspicion. I wouldn't have thought anything was off, except Rachno seemed so cautious about mentioning it. Good job. What happened to you? She frowned at his swollen ear. I was listening at the wrong keyhole. Go on and do your homework. Thanks, see you Monday. He entered his office, where a tall, gaunt man with bushy black eyebrows and a long, bony face scowled at him impatiently. I'm as interested in recovering these sables as you are, Gumbo. But you have to understand that I have other obligations as well. My time is valuable. I know. I won't keep you long. Were you on the floor when the Gaikwar made his selection yesterday? I handled the entire transaction myself, Zilberkiet replied smugly. I believe I may say that no one else in the department is as well equipped to discuss blue sables as. Of course. What I'm getting at is, did you happen to notice any other customer, not part of the Gaikwar's party, who lingered around while the old man made his purchase? Zilberkiet pursed his lips. Odd that you should ask that. I've been thinking about it myself. Yes, there was, a short fellow, paunchy type. Around 40 or so. Very well dressed. Very prosperous looking. What you'd call a red apple complexion, I suppose. Did he buy anything? No. He just loitered around the Gaikwar's group until they decided on the sables, then he drifted away. First time you'd seen this man? Thinking back, it seems to me I may have seen him before somewhere, but for the life of me, I can't recall where. Could you identify him from a photo? Easily. Gumbo apologized for delaying Zilberkiet and promised news of the sables shortly, then managed to send the fur buyer on his way. He unlocked his safe cabinet, took out an S&W .38, checked the load, and tucked it into his coat pocket. He'd never had occasion to use it in the store, but considering his recent encounter at Cars, it might be a useful gadget to have around. He locked up and left. At the precinct station, he spoke with Lieutenant McCrollins. Things are starting to crack open, Mac. You planning on doing all the busting, leaving us to pick up the pieces? The detective lieutenant wasn't thrilled with the idea. No. I'll give you the lion's share. All I want is a couple of crumbs, once I know who they are. I'll call for help. Right now, I want that girl. Can't blame you, brother. She's the best-looking dame this place has housed in many a day. They entered the cell block, filled with the stench of antiseptic. Keys rattled, bolts slid open. Georgia Carr huddled in a corner of the bunk. The lieutenant said. You're being released into Mr. Gumbo's custody, miss. Please, she pleaded, I don't want to go. Gumbo responded, they can't keep you here unless I sign a complaint, Miss Carr. I'm not signing one, so. At the mention of her name, she stiffened. If you're not detaining me, I can go where I want, can't I? You heard the lieutenant say you're still in my custody, Gumbo retorted. He led her out to his car and helped her in. Where are we going? She inquired as he slid in beside her. Greenlace Park. She cringed. You seem to know all about me. I'm just beginning to find out. You're going to tell me. I won't speak, no matter where you take me, she declared defiantly. Perhaps you'll change your mind once you see your brother, he suggested, but she didn't respond. He tried asking her about Berger, but that didn't lead anywhere either. She remained obstinately silent as they crossed the bridge and proceeded along the boulevard. It was only when they turned onto Greenlace Lane that she finally spoke up. The light Gumbo had left on shone brightly against the darkness of the street. Sam's home, she whispered. Gumbo wasn't entirely convinced, but he chose not to mention his doubts. Together, they walked up the path and stepped onto the porch. Georgia took out her key, unlocked the door, and suddenly recoiled in terror, grabbing Gumbo's wrist with a vice-like grip. Her eyes widened in shock at the sight of the man slumped against the small entryway's wall, his head tilted to one side and a crimson strip that resembled adhesive tape plastered across his forehead and trailing down his cheek. Sam Carr was indeed home. Chapter. Gumbo ushered the girl onto the porch and knelt to examine the body. He did it, she lamented. He really did it. Carr had been sitting with his back against the vestibule, leaning to his left, legs stretched out before him. His head was tilted toward his shoulder, his pale eyes staring through thick glasses at the blue-barreled .32 automatic held tightly in his right hand. Gumbo was no expert on firearms, but the bullet hole in the dead man's head appeared to have been made by a .32. Why would your brother kill himself? Georgia seemed dazed. I don't know. He grew frustrated. What has to happen for you to open up? She covered her eyes with the back of her hand. I've been afraid Sam would do this. He's been so depressed about the thefts at the store. Yesterday morning he was extremely down. He barely spoke to me at breakfast. Then, when Aunt Helen invited me to her house for the weekend, and Sam suddenly became so eager for me to go, I grew even more concerned about him. You weren't home last night? No. My aunt lives in Northport. She works at Radio City. She asked me to meet her right after her shift last night and go home with her. I did, even though I was worried about Sam. I tried to call him last night but couldn't reach him. I tried again early this morning. Still no answer. I had a premonition then that he'd done something desperate. So I caught the 10 o'clock bus and hurried straight here. It dawned on Gumbo that Carr's body had likely been right where it was now while he'd been talking to Pat Relit on the phone. Gumbo had searched the house but hadn't bothered to check the front porch or the vestibule. When he left, he'd used the back door. The corpse had certainly been there for some time. The fingernails were turning purple, the face grayish. Blood had seeped through the thick fibers of the doormat and dried. When I arrived, Georgia said dully. I found a mess of paper, cartons, and packing material scattered all over our kitchen. I knew what that meant, of course. Sam hadn't expected me home until tomorrow night. He'd probably intended to clean up before I returned. It sickened me to realize he'd been involved in something criminal like that, especially since I'd heard him making such a fuss about the package thieves who were stealing right under his nose. I called a taxi, went straight to the store, to Sam's checking stand where the trucks load. Continue. Gumbo weighed the possibility that the man whose body slumped there so miserably had been the man who'd attacked him, whose twisted grimace had appeared in that mirror. Maybe the poor man had thought he'd killed Gumbo, and in fear and remorse had come in here to the vestibule and shot himself. But if that were the case, why had that kitchen window been jimmied? Why hadn't Carr just stopped Gumbo from entering the house at all, as he'd have had the right to? Sam was paralyzed with fear, she said. When I told him what I'd seen. But he didn't deny he'd had a hand in unwrapping those packages. He just begged me to leave, not to talk about it there on the platform, and to hurry home and wait for him. Gumbo cocked his head. Somewhere in the house, a door had closed softly. With the front door open, a draft might have caused that, but he had to be sure. Wait. He drew his gun and cautiously entered the hallway, with CHE following closely behind. Gumbo held out an arm to stop Georgia. Stay on the porch. I'm not afraid, not of anything now that Sam's dead. Her voice was steady and devoid of fear. I don't care what happens to me now that Sam's gone. My brother was all I had in the world. Fine, but stay behind me. Gumbo proceeded through the dining room to the kitchen, turning on lights as he went. Georgia continued talking. I didn't want to leave the store, knowing deep down that Sam was involved in something that would separate us for a long time. I wouldn't have either if Freddie hadn't seen me talking to my brother and rushed toward us. Freddie? The guy who gave you the silver fox? Gumbo was focused on listening, half expecting a gunshot or the impact of a bullet from the darkness. I didn't want to tell you when you asked me in your office. His name's Freddie Wasson, but I never heard Sam or any of the other drivers call him anything but Freddie. Gumbo switched on the bedroom light. An open suitcase lay on the bed, shirts, underwear, and socks thrown in haphazardly. The suitcase hadn't been there when Gumbo had searched the house earlier. It might mean that Carr had initially planned to escape, only to change his mind and choose a swifter way out of his troubles. Freddy's a truck driver? Gumbo knew each of Nimbleit's 900-plus employees, but Wasson's name didn't sound familiar. Yes, of course. I first met him when I was modeling at Vanity Fair. He was so taken aback he momentarily forgot the possibility of someone hiding in a closet or behind the bed. You worked at Vanity Fair. Gumbo thought it was like playing Ring Around a Rosie, ending up right where he'd started. Until a couple of months ago. Does it make a difference? It might. Gumbo ran his finger along the side of the suitcase, inspected his fingertips solemnly. Everything was connected to the last 2 months, the wave of package thefts, Sam Carr's promotion, his recent dizzy spells, and now this girl quitting her job at the company Zilberkey had shown guarded interest in. You know this Freddy pretty well? I went to a few dances with him. He brought me home afterwards and met Sam. He kept coming around. My brother seemed to like him, at least initially. But for the last week, I've had the feeling Sam's been afraid of him. What does Freddy look like? Medium height, sort of stocky. Around 26 or 7, I'd say. Snub nose, sandy hair, blue eyes. Nice teeth. She hesitated. Gumbo thought bitterly that her description would fit 100,000 men in Queens County. It wouldn't be far off if she'd tried to describe Lyle Berger. I asked you if you knew Berger. Ever hear your brother mention a driver by that name? No, never. Well, what did Freddy do when he saw you talking to your brother? He led her out of the bedroom and back to the living room. The girl trembled, he could feel her shudder as he held her arm. He got right up in my face and told me to leave before I got into trouble. I must have become hysterical. I remember screaming trouble. Back at him. Then he grabbed me, swearing horribly, and shook me until my teeth chattered. He kept cursing and telling me that if I didn't keep my mouth shut, he'd shut it for me permanently. It gave me chills, the way he said it and the way he looked at me. I'd never heard him use such vile language before. I could see he was enraged and meant every word. So then? Gumbo went to the phone and began to dial. Of course, I thought Sam would step in to protect me, so I stood my ground and told Freddy that I'd say exactly what I thought was right. And if he was involved in package theft too, then that was just too bad. Georgia moved to the coffee table and started picking up fragments of the broken cigarette box from the carpet. But Sam didn't intervene. He looked terrified, pleading with me to leave before I made things worse. And Freddy? He pulled out a pocket knife, pressed a spring or something, and a long blade sprang at me. That was when I ran, when I realized he genuinely intended to kill me. I fled from the shipping bay. Freddy followed me to the sidewalk. I thought he was still chasing me when I turned the corner onto 5th Avenue, but I can't be sure now. Gumbo spoke into the phone, Lieutenant McCrollins? Then to Georgia, he asked, why didn't you run to the nearest cop? Because of Sam, she seemed surprised he didn't understand. I was terrified of Freddy. If you'd seen the malicious glint in his eye when he opened the knife, you would have been too. But I didn't want to do anything that might prevent Sam from having time to escape. Since I didn't dare to have Freddy arrested, I thought of getting myself arrested. The only way I knew to do that was to steal something. I'd seen how the police treated shoplifters when I was modeling for Mr. Doriandi. Gumbo connected with his contact on the line. Mac? Don Gumbo. I know it's out of your district, but there's a homicide I can hand over to you. It's connected to that package theft case. Where are you? Well, the body is at 81 Greenlace Lane. You know where Greenlace Park is? Sure. Who is it? Sam Carr, the head checker in our shipping department. Murder? Wouldn't know, that's your department. I'm after those blue sables. But Carr seems to have been mixed up with our missing truck. Really? You know the truck's been found? No. Where? State troopers found it an hour or so ago. Submerged in 20 feet of water in Hempstead Harbor. No kidding. The vehicle was empty except for the driver. He drowned at the wheel when the truck missed a curve and ran off the road into the Sound. As Gumbo processed this new information, he knew they were getting closer to solving the mystery. With McCrollins on the case and Freddy Wasson now a prime suspect, it was only a matter of time before they uncovered the truth. Chapter. Gumbo toyed with the swollen lobe of his right ear before placing the phone back in its cradle. He'd just hung up on Mac mid-sentence, something detective lieutenants weren't accustomed to and certainly wouldn't appreciate. But Gumbo's ear ached, reminding him of the agonizing moment he'd experienced in the car's living room. He intended to resolve this case without police involvement. McCrollins would expect the store protection chief to be at the scene of the crime, waiting for the squad car with its sergeant stenographer, photographer, and fingerprint specialists. However, if Gumbo waited for the officers to arrive, he'd find himself in a tedious interrogation that could become uncomfortable given that he was likely in the house when Carr died. More importantly, he'd miss the opportunity to investigate the Vanity Fair affair, as the Fordham Road shops didn't stay open too late on Saturday nights. It was already past 8. Gumbo felt uneasy about bringing the girl with him. She wouldn't want to leave her brother's body in the vestibule. Yet, he might need her. Surprisingly, she agreed to come along without objection, and Gumbo sensed she was telling the truth when she claimed nothing mattered to her anymore. But many things mattered to Gumbo: the location where the number 8 truck was discovered, on the route to or from Northport where Georgia had been the previous night, the deceased truck driver, identified as Lyle Berger by the wallet found in his pocket, and Mrs. Berger's insistence that Georgia had been involved with her husband. Freddie Wasson's description could easily match Berger's, but why Sam Carr would support such deception, particularly involving his own sister, was challenging to comprehend. Gumbo could only think of one plausible explanation. When he asked Georgia if Freddie had ever driven his truck to the Carr residence, she responded with a baffled look and a definitive no. Georgia provided little more than monosyllabic answers to questions about the Vanity Fair affair and its owner, Jacques Dawson. The store was large and prosperous, mainly selling affordable coats and imitation furs. Dawson was an acceptable boss who occasionally made passes at the models but didn't fire them for rejecting his advances. He paid low wages but offered generous discounts to employees who wanted to buy furs for themselves. That was all she knew or was willing to say. Gumbo parked around the corner from the Vanity Fair Fair's massive, floodlit sign, visible a mile down the Grand Concourse. He instructed the girl to stay in the car until he returned. "What are you going to do in there?" she asked. "Look around," he replied. As he approached the store entrance, Gumbo discreetly stepped into a theater lobby to avoid the tall, gaunt figure of Zilberkey leaving the fur fair and striding briskly in the opposite direction. Gumbo waited for the buyer to vanish into the crowd before entering the store. The display windows shone brightly, but the store's interior was lit by a soft glow from the ceiling, making it difficult to spot any imperfections in the furs. Gumbo took note of a dozen customers browsing the coat racks and their partners lounging in plush chairs. 4 saleswomen observed the scene with a haughty air, seemingly scorning anyone who considered buying anything less than mink. A plump woman with a calculating gaze and a thin, cunning mouth approached Gumbo. He mumbled something about a gift and a fur neckpiece for a girl. He mumbled something about a girl, a gift, a fur neckpiece. She directed him to one of the impeccably dressed salesgirls, who exuded an air of icy professionalism. He allowed her to persuade him for a while, feigning disinterest with the foxes and the caracal she presented. "Haven't you something better?" he asked. "I wouldn't mind spending a little more if I could get something truly exceptional." "Just a moment, sir. I'll see if Mr. Dawson has any recommendations." She disappeared behind gold velvet drapes that cascaded from ceiling to floor. Her absence was brief. When she emerged, parting the opulent draperies with theatrical flair, she held them aside for a short, portly man with bulging brown eyes, smooth brown hair, and rosy cheeks. Gumbo thought Zilberkey's description fit the man perfectly. "Mr. Dawson." The salesgirl gestured with the flourish of a master of ceremonies introducing the star of the show. "The gentleman is interested in something a little out of the ordinary, Mr. Dawson." She retreated. "Did you have any specific, type of fur in mind, sir?" The plump cheeks formed a smile. Gumbo's nerves tingled. There couldn't be 2 men with such smooth, oily, hesitant inflections. This had to be the Joe who'd tried to get Gumbo to release Georgia Carr. "Well, I don't know." He kept his own voice flat, neutral. "Ermine, perhaps, or sable." Dawson's smile froze. The protruding eyes grew cautious. "Ermine is not, a favored pelt for neckpieces this season. As for sable, high-quality skins are exceedingly difficult to obtain." Gumbo wondered if his voice had been recognized. "How much would you charge me for top-grade sable?" "I don't have such a fur in stock at the moment, sir. A truly exceptional Russian blue, anywhere up to $5,000. "Oh, hell." Gumbo waved a dismissive hand. "I hit the jackpot this week, so I plan to buy a present my girl wouldn't forget, in a hurry. But I wouldn't spend more than a couple of thousand at the most." Greed Ward with caution in the furrier's expression. "Perhaps on Monday, if you'd bring the young lady around. I may be able to obtain something that suits you." "No need to wait until Monday," Gumbo grinned. "I've got her right out in my car now. I'll bring her in." As he strode out to the car, Gumbo wondered if the man would dare sell a stolen fur that would be headline news in every major paper tomorrow morning. All thoughts of furs evaporated when he rounded the corner and saw his car. The girl was gone. On the curb beside the front seat, a glint of gold shone in the flickering neon lights of the movie theater and the five and dime store. Lipstick. Someone had approached the car while she was fixing her lips and had either made her leave or persuaded her to go. There was no other evidence of a struggle. Gumbo considered the possibility that his sympathies were clouding his judgment. Georgia might have just been waiting for a chance to run out on him. When it came right down to it, he had no concrete proof she hadn't shot Sam Carr herself, placing the pistol in his hand to make it look like a suicide. No, that left too many unanswered questions. The stout floor lady paid no heed as he rushed past the customers, adorned in rabbit and muskrat dyed to resemble seal and mink. She didn't even look his way as he approached the golden curtain at the store's far end. However, the salesgirl who had helped him earlier called out sharply. "Sir. That's private." He proceeded without answering or slowing. Behind the long curtain lay a corridor filled with packing boxes, portable coat racks, and display fixtures. Doors marked women and an area with a steno desk and green files were visible, and at the very back was a door labeled J. Dawson, President. He didn't bother to knock. Dawson had his back to the door, standing before a massive black safe. He spun around quickly, pushing the safe door closed, allowing Gumbo only a fleeting glimpse of plastic garment bags hanging from a bar inside the safe. The man's face drained of color, and his eyes bulged as if they might burst from their sockets. "If you don't mind waiting, out in the sales room for a few minutes? I have other business." "Sure you do." Gumbo shut the door behind him, found the key, and locked it. "I won't wait more than a minute either. If you haven't told me by then what's happened to Georgia Carr, I'll give you a beating you'll remember for the rest of your life." "I don't understand, sir." "You will." Gumbo closed in as Dawson retreated toward the safe. He grabbed the furrier's polished hair, jerked the man's head back so his chin pointed to the ceiling, and his crown banged against the safe. "I'm not playing games with you, Dawson." He yanked the hair, causing the furrier to stand on his toes, squealing. "And if you can use a phone after I'm through with you, you're welcome to call the cops. I'll take my chances with them. I can say you tried to bribe me this afternoon at Nimblett's, which is true. As for how you'll fare after they've inspected the contents of your little iron wardrobe there. I know nothing, about Miss Carr." "Sure. She worked for you. You know she met a trucker named Freddie Wasson here. You know him. You had to know he tried to scare her senseless to keep her from spilling the beans about those stolen sables because you tried to get her out of my hands into his." "Let go. Let go." The furrier wailed. Tears streamed down his plump cheeks. What you might not know, loose hair came away in Gumbo's fingers as he released Dawson. "Is that two men are already doomed because of this mess. Whether those deaths were accidental, suicidal, or murder is anyone's guess. Mine is that someone's likely to face a slow burn in a big chair before this is over. But if I don't find out where that girl is, you won't have to worry about that." The fur man clasped his hands on top of his head. "Freddie?" he whimpered. "I haven't seen Freddie." Gumbo moved swiftly. Before he could wind his fingers in Dawson's hair again, the portly man fell to his knees, scrambled to a small table, and reached for a drawer. Gumbo kicked like a fullback punting from behind his goal. His foot caught the drawer squarely, slammed it shut, and crushed the fingers with which the furrier was gripping a nickel-plated hammerless. Dawson shrieked, putting his injured fingers in his mouth. Out in the hall, fists pounded on the door. "Tell him to call an ambulance," Gumbo said grimly. "You'll need one." He retrieved the shiny pistol, tucked it into his topcoat. Then he got a firm two-handed grip on Dawson's top knot, hauled the man to his feet, who chattered with pain. "I tell you, I haven't seen Freddie tonight, or Miss Carr." "You know where to find him, don't you?" "He lives at." "Where is he now? Where would he have taken her?" Excited voices in the corridor cried. Mr. Dawson, we phoned the police. They'll be here in a minute." The furrier wilted. "The Jiffy Garage, maybe. It's at." "Don't bother telling me. Drive me there." Gumbo unlocked the door. The floor lady, accompanied by two of her salesgirls, rushed up the hall toward the front of the store. "Help! Thief! Police!" they screeched. Dawson howled. No. Stop that noise." They huddled against the wall, uncertainly. Gumbo asked. "Back way somewhere?" "There." Dawson pointed. Desperate to leave before the police arrived, he led the way through the stenographic office to a door opening onto an alley. Sirens wailed wildly as Gumbo marched the fur man to the car. They pulled away just as the first police cars arrived, their lights flashing in the night. Gumbo kept a tight grip on Dawson, making it clear that any attempt to escape would be futile. Their destination, the Jiffy Garage, loomed in the distance, and Gumbo couldn't help but wonder if they'd find Georgia Carr there or if the mystery would deepen even further. Chapter. Dawson drove, while Gumbo sat beside him, gripping the .38 in his hand. He wasn't taking any more risks. His decision to bring Georgia here hadn't worked out well. If it hadn't been for him, she'd be safe behind bars right now. Dawson navigated down the Grand Concourse, crossing the Triborough toward Long Island City. As he drove, he shared a slow stream of information. As Gumbo had suspected, Freddie Wasson wasn't a nimblet driver at all. He worked for a parcel delivery service called Jiffy Jeeps. It was a small operation, only in business for 6 months or so. They serviced manufacturers and wholesalers without their own trucks, making deliveries of merchandise to stores. Freddie would visit Vanity for a fare every other day or so, probably making deliveries to nimblets even more often. Freddie's job allowed him to drive his truck right up to a store's shipping platform, as occasionally he'd have to take back returned goods. However, Dawson denied any knowledge of parcel thefts. He claimed Freddie had never offered him stolen merchandise. A man of Jacques Dawson's reputation? 30 years in fur retailing? It was inconceivable that he would have anything to do with such dishonest offers, even if they had been made. Regarding the 2 deceased men, Dawson insisted he knew neither of them. He had indeed talked to Gumbo about releasing Georgia, but only because Freddie had called him, asking him to do so. Freddie had merely said the girl had found herself in trouble, and he wanted to help her but couldn't do it himself. No one would have paid him any attention if he'd gone to the store protection office in his driver's uniform. The car rolled through desolate streets lined with factories, warehouses, junkyards, freight cars on sidings, and garages. Dawson slowed the car in front of a tall wooden fence. He stopped at a pair of wide swinging doors with yellow lettering that read, Jiffy Jeeps, quick pickups for jobbers and wholesalers. 50 feet behind the fence, a rusty sheet iron structure towered against the night skyline. You see, Dawson said, it's all dark. All the trucks would be in by now, and, there's nobody here. Gumbo exited the car. No lights shone from the building. The gate was locked. A bell, surrounded by a circle of yellow paint, had a cardboard sign tacked over it that read, Ring Bell for Nightman. He pressed it, surprised by the loud clang echoing through the empty street. Nothing stirred. He climbed onto the car's fender, stood on the running board, and peered over the fence. Just inside the gate, a dark silhouette stood out against the lighter gray of the gravel. The silhouette moved, the figure of a man stooping to look between the cracks of the swinging gates. Gumbo stepped down quietly. Hey, he shouted. Anybody around? There was no reply. He went to the driver's side, nudged Dawson away from the wheel. No luck, he announced loudly. Let's go. He took the wheel, backed the car up the street 100 feet, shifted gears, and accelerated. The car gained speed. He swung in a wide half-arc across the street, aiming straight for the Jiffy Jeep entrance without braking. The bumper slammed against the wooden gates, breaking them open and sending splinters flying. Caught in Gumbo's headlights, a man wearing driver's breeches and puttees picked himself up from the gravel where the gate had thrown him and limped into the shadows. Chapter. He killed the engine and slammed on the brakes. Before the car fully stopped, he flung open his door and dragged Dawson out from under the steering wheel. The furrier opened his mouth to protest, but Gumbo's swift right hook snapped his head back. Dawson grunted, slumping against the open car door. Gumbo struck him twice more on the back of the neck as Dawson collapsed, face first, onto the dirt. Rabbit punches weren't fair play, but Gumbo couldn't risk Dawson's prying eyes. The task ahead was dangerous enough already. Gumbo left Dawson where he lay. The headlights illuminated a wide path through the yard, but shadows and dark corners persisted on either side. The driver had scrambled to the right, behind a parked panel Jeep. Gumbo followed suit, skirting along a wooden fence, out of the light. He dropped to his knees, peering under the Jeep. No legs were visible against the backlight. Gravel crunched softly closer to the building. Gumbo removed his shoes and moved stealthily toward the noise. A distant tugboat hooted in the river behind the low shed. Gumbo crept alongside a massive 10-wheel trailer that loomed like a behemoth against the night sky. The ragged panting of a man drew closer. Gumbo gripped his S&W by the barrel, ready to use it as a club. He stood motionless, barely breathing, as the strained panting approached. The driver was circling the trailer, aiming for the street. A shadow grew at the corner of the trailer, morphing into a head cautiously peeking out. The man turned slightly toward the faint light spilling into the yard. Gumbo's temples pulsed with the pounding of blood. He couldn't see the driver clearly, but the weak light revealed enough of the eyes and white teeth in the tense mouth. This was the frightened face he had seen in the mirror at Cars, the man who had brutally attacked him. Gumbo lunged, swinging the gun. The driver cursed and swung a tire iron, striking Gumbo in the mouth, cutting his lips and loosening his teeth. Gumbo grabbed the uniform's jacket, but the driver tore free. The jacket ripped, and Gumbo swung the gun butt once more. The two grappled, trading painful blows. The driver's desperate final attempt to claw Gumbo's eyes out failed, and his fingers went limp. He became dead weight in Gumbo's hands. Gumbo took a long moment to catch his breath, recover from the nausea, examine his torn ear, and wipe his bleeding mouth. He dragged the unconscious man by the collar into the light and searched his pockets. This was Freddy, no doubt. A bank book showed recent deposits under the name A. Frederick Wasson Jr. A set of keys, including one well-worn key in a pants pocket, accompanied the book. Dawson groaned and rolled onto his back as Gumbo finished searching. The store protection chief returned to the car and prodded Dawson's plump belly with the muzzle of his gun. "Up on your feet, mister. We've got work to do." Dawson clutched his jaw, staggered to his feet, and only weakly protested when Gumbo instructed him to haul Wasson to the sheet metal building. The furrier wheezed and complained but complied. The loose key fit neatly into a lock set in a corrugated metal door. Gumbo opened it, found a switch, and illuminated the small office within a garage and repair shop. A girl's handbag rested on the roll-top desk. "Seat him in that swivel chair," Dawson instructed. "Remove his belt and bind his hands behind his back, through the back of the chair. There you go." As the furrier secured Freddy with practiced precision, Gumbo peered into the knee-hole below the roll-top desk. He discovered Georgia, squeezed into the small space, her limbs bound and her mouth gagged with her own gloves. Gumbo carefully pulled her out, cutting the ropes and removing the makeshift gag. "He was going to kill me," Georgia gasped. "I told you he was." "You were right about him being a dangerous man," Gumbo conceded. "But I'm not sure about murder. He had an opportunity to kill me earlier today, and he didn't. I doubt he's responsible for Berger's death or your brother's." "Sam, murdered? We'll have to wait for the autopsy results to be sure," Gumbo replied. "However, I'd say he wasn't the type to take such a drastic shortcut." He decided not to elaborate on his reasoning, that people who wore glasses always removed them before taking their own lives, and that the dust-covered suitcase with haphazardly strewn clothes didn't align with the fastidious nature of Sarah Carr. "We'll know for certain soon enough." Freddy emitted a strange, guttural sound from deep within his throat, his eyes snapping open as he stared wildly at Gumbo, Durandi, and Georgia. "That's right," Gumbo said. "The game's over. You know the score. I suggest you accept your situation, or you won't appreciate what comes next." He reached for the phone on the roll-top desk. "Jacques." Freddy snarled through clenched teeth. "You double-crossing." "Silence," Gumbo cut him off. "Once I get this number, you'll inform your boss to come here as quickly as possible. You're in a tight spot and need assistance. It won't be a lie, either." "No," Freddy shook his head. "Yes," Gumbo concluded, dialing the number and holding the receiver to the captive driver's mouth. "You'll say exactly what I told you, or you'll experience a rather unpleasant time at the police station, hearing what the boys in the back room have to say about your predicament." The buzzing of the call signal filled the small office. A mocking voice from the doorway interrupted the tension. "Was someone trying to reach me? Don't move. This trigger I'm holding can fire 6 rounds per second, and at 10 feet, I couldn't miss." Chapter. Mrs. Berger stood in the doorway, pushing the office door wide open to accommodate the menacing presence of the sawed-off shotgun cradled in her arms. Gumbo placed his pistol on the roll-top desk, instantly recognizing the murderous intent in her eyes, which peered over the weapon's stubby nose. George's face remained frozen in shock as she stared at the stout woman with the petulant mouth. Freddy's voice came out in a hoarse stammer. "Geez. How did you get here, Stella?" Her smile was bland as she replied, "Drove down from Vanity. I was right about you after all, Jacques." No, the furrier protested nervously, "You were not. So used to your tricky deals, you finally double-crossed yourself, Jacques," she said casually, as if discussing a cake recipe. "When the girls at the fair told me you'd left with this store detective, sneaking out the back way, I knew you'd gone soft on me." "That's right, Stella," Freddy bobbed his head. "He must have told the gumshoe because he knew your phone number." Dawson held up both palms. "You don't understand." She chuckled, "Don't I just? With Freddy in trouble and the police searching for me, who'd have those blue sables to cash in on with no split to anyone? After I masterminded framing Sam Carr so the deal would work, too. After I took all the risk, driving Lyle's car when you lured him to 53rd Street, Stella. Don't forget that. Freddie growled. I won't, honey, she promised pleasantly. I'll have it carved on your headstone. Stell. Freddie struggled with his bound hands, fear returning to his face. Make them untie me. Why? She asked. Isn't it just as easy to take it sitting down? Freddie swallowed hard, unable to find his voice. The shadow of death loomed ominously close in the brightly lit room. Dawson cried out, You wouldn't do it. You really wouldn't. The muzzle of the submachine gun shifted to aim at Dawson's navel. I'll save you for last, Jacques, so you can see how the others take it. You've earned that for spilling the whole bag of beans. Gumbo's hand slapped the desk, causing everyone to jump, except for Mrs. Berger. I don't know that it makes much difference, the way things stand, but Dawson didn't tip me off about you, Mrs. Berger. He didn't have to. We didn't even bring up your name. The stout woman remained unimpressed. You're a liar. How could you have known about me? I don't take any particular credit for being suspicious of you, Gumbo admitted, weighing the risks of attacking her. It wasn't much of a gamble, he'd never make it across the room before the submachine gun wiped out everyone inside. When I was talking to you about your husband, he continued, you mentioned how odd it was that he disappeared just when a lot of sables had been stolen. Nobody but the thieves knew about those sables being missing, except a few top people at Nimblitz, Herb Zilberkiet, Pat Relit, and the front office. You claimed you hadn't seen your husband since yesterday morning, so he couldn't have told you about them. She shook her head in admiration. See how dumb I am? I pegged you as a store lackey, fronting for the management. Turns out you've got a brain in your head. But without any microphone to record our conversation, nobody outside this room will ever know how smart you were. Gumbo decided he'd have to take the gamble anyway, despite knowing he'd lose. There was a slim chance that if he lunged boldly enough, Mrs. Berger would keep her weapon trained on him long enough to give Georgia an opportunity to escape, maybe even make it out safely. He owed her that much for involving her in this mess. He noticed Dawson inching closer to Mrs. Berger. If the furrier had any desperate plans, Gumbo wouldn't interfere. He'd delay his last-ditch effort as long as possible. Well, it wasn't just that remark, Gumbo spoke testily, as if annoyed by her self-assurance. Just then, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they neared the building. The sound shook Mrs. Berger's confidence, and her grip on the submachine gun faltered for a split second. Seizing the opportunity, Gumbo launched himself at her, knocking the weapon aside. As it clattered to the floor, Georgia scrambled to safety. Dawson joined the fray, grappling with Mrs. Berger as Gumbo fought to subdue her. Together, they managed to restrain her, just as the sound of police officers storming the building filled the room. Within moments, the police swarmed the office, securing the scene and taking Mrs. Berger into custody. Gumbo, Dawson, Georgia, and Freddie breathed sighs of relief, grateful to have survived the harrowing ordeal. As the police escorted Mrs. Berger out of the office, she glared at Gumbo, her eyes filled with a seething rage. You may have won this time, but it's not over, she hissed, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Gumbo met her gaze with a steely resolve, knowing that though this chapter of their lives had come to a close, the next one would be just as unpredictable and dangerous.